I was supposed to be 200 miles away at a software summit in Seattle when I walked through the trees and found a crowd of strangers sipping champagne in my living room like it was a hotel lobby. One woman was taking selfies in front of my fireplace, another man was asking about the price of the handcrafted deck I'd built myself, and right in the middle of them all, standing with a clipboard and her smug little power stance, was Karen from the HOA, acting like she owned the place. I stood there stunned, mud on my boots and suitcase still in hand, as she smiled at the guests and told them the seller was out of town indefinitely. And when our eyes finally met, she went pale, dropped her clipboard, and screamed the most unbelievable thing I've ever heard in my life. She pulled out her phone, dialed 911, and shouted, "This man is trespassing on private property." I was standing in my own cabin. The weekend had already started strangely. My conference was cancelled last minute due to a plumbing failure at the venue, and instead of spending 3 nights in a chain hotel listening to talks about blockchain data processing, I figured I'd retreat to my real sanctuary, my off-grid cabin nestled deep in the Cascade. I hadn't told anyone I was coming back early, not even my neighbors. It was supposed to be just me, the woods, and the smell of cedar from the fireplace. I made the 3-hour drive in a state of blissful ignorance, already picturing myself in front of my wood stove with a mug of coffee and no internet for miles. But as I crested the final ridge near my property line, I saw something that yanked me out of my fantasy like a slap to the face. There were cars. Not just 1 or 2, but a dozen. SUVs, crossovers, even a luxury coupe that definitely didn't belong on mountain gravel. I slowed the truck and turned off the lights as I neared the edge of the tree line. Something felt off, very off. My cabin was supposed to be locked, secluded, and definitely not open to the public. I parked just far enough into the brush to stay hidden, grabbed my duffel bag, and hiked the last 50 yards silently through the woods like I was sneaking up on enemy territory. I stopped just behind a line of shrubs near the back of the property, peered through the trees, and what I saw made my blood run cold. People were walking in and out of my home like it was a Sunday real estate showing. They were holding brochures. A group of teens were sitting on the porch rail, one guy was pointing at the rafters admiring the exposed beamwork, and someone was actually using my outdoor grill. A banner was staked in the yard that read, "Private showing today only, must qualify." I stared at it, blinking, thinking this had to be a prank or a hallucination brought on by stress and truck stop coffee. I rounded the house quietly, sticking to the tree line, until I had a better view of the living room through the back window. There were my hand-carved shelves, my antique clock, and a group of strangers admiring a rug I had bought in Morocco. And there, in the middle of it all, stood Karen. Same perfectly curled bob cut, the same cheap gold jewelry clinking every time she pointed at something. She was giving a full tour of my home, describing the insulation quality, the radiant heating system, and even had the nerve to call the custom workbench in my shed a quaint little hobby space for your husband's tools. I was still frozen in place when she moved toward the back deck and came face to face with me through the glass. We locked eyes. Her smile flickered, collapsed, and what followed was a train wreck of flustered blinks, clenched teeth, and fake calmness. She slid the door open an inch and whispered sharply, "You weren't supposed to be here." I asked her the only thing I could form at that moment, "What the hell are you doing in my house?" She stuttered something about a misunderstanding, that she thought the property was abandoned. When I told her to get out and started stepping inside, that's when she did it. She screamed, full voice, to everyone in the house, "He's an intruder. Call the police." And then she pulled out her phone and dialed 911 herself, right there in my kitchen. When the sheriff deputies arrived 20 minutes later, I was standing on my own porch holding my ID and trying to explain that the cabin was mine. Karen, naturally, rushed to them first, giving them some half-baked story about how I had previously sold the home to her cousin and refused to leave after being notified. The officers were polite but clearly skeptical. They asked for documentation, and I pointed them toward the secure panel in the living room behind the bookshelf. Inside, I kept everything, from my passport to the deed to the cabin itself. They took photos, radioed in the parcel number, and within minutes confirmed that the cabin was, beyond any doubt, mine. That should have ended things. But of course it didn't. Karen pivoted instantly. She said I must have faked the paperwork, that I was trying to scam her out of a property she'd already started showing to serious buyers. When one of the deputies asked her if she had any documents proving ownership or authorization, she produced a crumpled flyer and a handwritten note that looked like it was scribbled on the back of a grocery receipt. She had nothing. No legal contract, no sale agreement, not even an email thread. And yet, she kept insisting she had verbal confirmation. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so infuriating. As the officers started taking witness statements from the guests, the entire situation began unraveling. One couple admitted they were told the place was being liquidated quietly due to bankruptcy. Another woman said she paid a non-refundable $500 fee to reserve a walkthrough. A man with a Bluetooth earpiece said he was promised early bidding access and had already wired a deposit. Each time someone revealed they had paid or committed to something, Karen's face darkened a shade. But she never backed down. She stood there with her arms folded, trying to gaslight half the mountain into believing she had every right to be there. By the time the officers finally dispersed the crowd and asked Karen to leave pending investigation, the sun had dipped behind the trees and the place looked like it had hosted a festival. Empty wine cups, napkins, footprints across my polished wood floors. I didn't even know where to start. I stood in the middle of the living room and looked around at the strangers' mess, trying to understand how the day had turned from a peaceful weekend into full-blown legal madness. One thing was clear. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate scheme. And Karen was in far deeper than she realized. What she didn't know was that I was about to dig up every lie, every forged document, and every dollar she made off my property. And when I was done, her little open house would feel like a picnic compared to what was coming next. Ask ChatGPT. The next morning, the air felt heavier than usual. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours, my mind tangled in disbelief over what had just happened. My cabin, the one place where I could unplug from the chaos of the world, had become ground zero for a fraud operation led by a woman who once fined me for stacking my firewood 2 inches too high. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of bitter coffee, staring at my phone, debating my next move. What Karen had done wasn't just an intrusion, it was criminal, and I wasn't about to let it go. I decided to start where the mess began, the HOA. I drove down the winding hill road into town and pulled up in front of the HOA office, a pretentious-looking building with a fake colonial facade and plastic flower beds out front. The same place where Karen and her friends had held their monthly meetings, all while pretending to be guardians of neighborhood dignity. Inside, the place smelled like lemon-scented floor polish and arrogance. I asked to speak with Barry, the HOA office manager. He was a balding man in his 40s with a nervous energy and a voice that trembled even when asking if I wanted coffee. Barry looked up from his computer as I walked in, his face immediately dropping into a blank expression. He knew. Before I could even say anything, he muttered something about being surprised to see me back so soon. I asked him plainly why Karen was hosting showings at my cabin. His stammered response was incoherent at best. Something about a form I allegedly filed stating that I had abandoned the property and was relocating out of state. I asked to see the form. He hesitated, stood up, walked into the back room, and returned with a folder. Inside was a document titled, Property Vacancy Notification, supposedly signed by me and dated 2 weeks prior. The problem was, not only was the signature not mine, but the address listed for forwarding mail wasn't even close to any place I'd ever lived. The email provided was a Gmail address I had never seen before. Karen had gone full rogue, submitting fake forms and impersonating me through a burner email. When I pressed Barry about how this was accepted without direct verification, He weakly defended it by saying that Karen told him I preferred minimal contact, and that I was transitioning properties. I asked him how he could accept that without talking to me personally. He said Karen insisted it was time-sensitive and presented it as an HOA-approved internal matter. It was then I realized just how much power Karen had accumulated by bullying and manipulating everyone around her. Barry wasn't evil. He was just spineless. He showed me emails between him and Karen, and some between Karen and a few board members. Every message from her was marked urgent, littered with phrases like per protocol and under directive, all written with that same faux professionalism that masks fraud with flowery language. I took photos of everything. Barry didn't even stop me. If anything, he seemed relieved someone was finally pushing back. On my way out, I was stopped by a woman in the parking lot who had attended the showing the previous day. Her name was Patricia, a schoolteacher from a nearby town, and she looked both embarrassed and furious. She said she had driven over an hour with her sister after seeing Karen's post on a private Facebook group advertising a bank-distressed property off-grid. She had even sent a $500 deposit through PayPal to reserve first offer. When I asked if she still had the listing, she pulled out her phone and showed it to me. The post had been deleted, but she had screenshots. Karen had claimed she was the property's caretaker, that the owner had moved out and needed a quick private sale, and that only pre-screened buyers would be considered. She had even included staged photos from inside the cabin, pictures that looked like they were taken while I was away on a work trip. That's when it hit me. Karen had been inside my cabin before. She must have broken in days or weeks earlier, taken those photos, and crafted her con long before I returned. This wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated. And if she had a key, that meant either she picked the lock or someone in the HOA gave her access. The sense of betrayal deepened. I had neighbors I trusted, people I waved to on walks, shared firewood with, even invited over for barbecues. And now, someone among them had helped her violate my sanctuary. I went home and started documenting everything. I made a digital folder titled Karen Gate and uploaded every photo, email, screenshot, and recording I had. I installed a new set of security cameras around the cabin, ones I could monitor remotely. I contacted my home insurance company to file a claim for unlawful entry and potential property damage, just in case. But most importantly, I called Rachel. Rachel and I had known each other since college. She was now a real estate attorney and, conveniently, a certified fire investigator and legal consultant for Municipal Zoning Board. She was also the one who once pulled Karen's cat out of a burning garage, only to be slapped with a noise complaint 2 weeks later. When I told her what happened, she didn't laugh, at first. But after I told her Karen called the cops on me for trespassing in my own home, she let out a snort loud enough to be heard through the receiver. Then she got serious. She told me what I already suspected. This wasn't just HOA drama. It was criminal real estate fraud, impersonation, and possibly theft by deception. And the best part? If we played it right, we could catch Karen in the act again. Rachel suggested we set a trap. She'd pose as an interested buyer and reach out to Karen through the Facebook group under a fake name. If Karen responded, made another showing offer, or mentioned my property again, it would be clear proof she was operating with fraudulent intent. I loved the idea. It was time Karen realized this wasn't her neighborhood to rule. By evening, Rachel had created a new profile, complete with a stock photo and a fabricated backstory as a corporate buyer relocating from out of state. She messaged Karen's group account, using the exact language Patricia had shown me. Within 2 hours, Karen responded. She thanked Erica T. for reaching out and confirmed that the cabin was still available. She asked for an interest fee of $300 and offered to meet this weekend for a personal showing. She even attached a fake property listing in PDF format with my address, photos from my own cabin, and a description that said, "Secluded gem, owner vacated, immediate closing available." I sat at my desk, staring at the screen as Rachel forwarded me the entire conversation. There it was. Undeniable proof that Karen was actively running a scam with my property as the bait. It was surreal, enraging, and at the same time oddly satisfying. Because now we had her. On record. On file. In print. And what Karen didn't know was that the next time she tried to show the cabin, she wouldn't be greeted by prospective buyers. She'd be walking straight into a sting. The days leading up to the sting operation felt like the calm before a storm, the eerie kind of stillness that settles just before lightning strike. I kept the cameras rolling, the property locked tighter than a bank vault, and every interaction recorded with timestamp. Rachel was relentless, coordinating with her legal contacts and helping build a folder so watertight it could survive a hurricane. Karen, on the other hand, had no idea what was coming. She was busy responding to Rachel's fake buyer persona, setting up the next showing as if nothing had happened. It was incredible how brazen she was, how confidently she laid out the lies. According to her, the seller had moved overseas, the home was vacant, and showings were appointment only through her exclusive listing service. She even offered a referral bonus if the buyer brought along friends. Rachel scheduled the fake showing for Saturday afternoon. We notified the local authorities beforehand, including the same officers who had been called during Karen's original 911 stunt. To our relief, one of them, Deputy Waller, remembered the incident vividly and said he'd be glad to help monitor the operation. It wasn't often he got to arrest someone for trying to sell a house they didn't own. Rachel also arranged for 2 off-duty officers to pose as buyers, just in case Karen tried to bail early. It was all falling into place. Every time I thought about her standing in my living room again, smiling like a snake oil saleswoman, I got a little more eager for her to see the trap snap shut. Saturday arrived with perfect blue skies, the kind Karen probably believed would reflect well in her imaginary listing photos. I pretended to be out of town, parking my truck 2 miles down at a neighbor's garage and hiking up the back route, staying low. Rachel arrived first, wearing oversized sunglasses, a denim jacket, and a small camera hidden in a brooch. Karen greeted her at the gate like she was meeting royalty. She even brought fresh-baked cookies. That was her signature touch, apparently. As Rachel stepped inside and made idle small talk, 2 more buyers followed her in, both undercover officers. Karen didn't bat an eye. She started the pitch just like last time, walking them through the rooms, explaining the seller's absence, and listing the price as a bargain for quick cash offers. Meanwhile, I was monitoring everything from a hidden window on the 2nd floor, recording her every word. I watched her point out my handmade lighting fixtures and describe them as restoration pieces, completely fabricated. She even claimed the deck had been recently refinished. It hadn't. I had planned to do that next month. As the group moved outside, Karen took them to the shed and opened it with a key she wasn't supposed to have. That was the last thing she would do with it. Deputy Waller and another officer stepped out from behind the trees and identified themselves. Karen froze, still clutching her real estate pamphlets like they were magical shield. Rachel backed away slowly as the officers moved in. Karen stammered, asked what was going on, and said she had every right to be there. When asked to produce any form of legal documentation authorizing her to show or sell the cabin, she suddenly became less eloquent. She said it was verbal. She claimed the owner was unreachable. She even tried to say that Rachel herself had misled her. But none of it worked. Waller calmly read her the charges: trespassing, fraud, attempted theft by deception, and unlawful use of property. Karen's expression twisted as she realized she wasn't going to talk her way out of this one. As they escorted her toward the patrol car, she looked up at the cabin, eyes darting around as if searching for some lifeline. That's when she saw me, standing on the porch, arms crossed. Her jaw clenched. She shouted something incoherent, probably a mix of curses and desperation, but it didn't matter anymore. She was done. The sting was a success, and now I had all the proof I needed to take things even further. The fallout was fast and furious. News of the arrest spread through the neighborhood like a wildfire. Karen had always been the self-declared queen of the HOA, the woman who handed out fines like candy and showed up at people's doors with printed regulations highlighted in yellow. But now she was exposed. The other HOA board members went into immediate panic mode. I received calls from 2 of them that night, both claiming they had no idea what Karen had been doing and that they were just as shocked as I was. I didn't believe them. At least one of them had to know something. No one fabricates legal documents and forges an identity without some help or blind eye along the way. A special emergency meeting was called by the HOA Council the following week. I attended it, and the room was more packed than I'd ever seen. Neighbors who hadn't shown up to a single meeting in years were suddenly there with folded arms and tense expressions. Barry, the office manager, looked like he wanted to sink into his chair and disappear. Karen, of course, was absent. She'd been released on bond pending trial but wasn't allowed near the property or HOA premises. During the meeting, I presented everything. The emails, the screenshots, the fake listing, the payment receipts, the recording from the sting operation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any outrage. Gasps rippled through the crowd as I laid it all out, and when I was done, you could hear a pin drop. One woman actually stood up and asked, "Is this who's been representing us all these years?" It was a turning point. People who had once feared Karen's wrath now turned against her with equal intensity. There were calls to audit the entire HOA's finances. Petitions began circulating to have the board dissolved or at least reorganized with oversight from the county. Within a week, 2 board members resigned. Barry took a leave of absence. The Facebook group that Karen used for her scams was reported and taken down. But the most satisfying part was what came next. Several of the people Karen had scammed filed a class action lawsuit against her, and I joined them. Not because I needed the money back, but because it was the clearest, most public way to hold her accountable. Rachel handled the legal filings, and with the mountains of evidence we had, it wasn't a question of whether she'd lose. It was how bad. One unexpected surprise came when I got a message from a man named Doug. He introduced himself as the cousin Karen had claimed owned the property. He said he hadn't spoken to Karen in months and had no idea his name had been dragged into her schemes. He offered to sign an affidavit clarifying he had no involvement and even apologized for what happened. That testimony turned out to be helpful when presenting intent during legal proceedings. Every layer of her story unraveled faster than the last. And through all of it, I stayed in my cabin. I fixed what had been disturbed, replaced the locks again, updated my alarm systems, and even built a new gate with a biometric scanner. Every time I passed the living room, I remembered that surreal day when strangers milled about as if they belonged there. Not anymore. This was mine. And Karen was no longer a threat but a cautionary tale. One that wasn't over yet. Because the real courtroom drama was still ahead. And if Karen thought the sting operation was the worst of it, she was about to learn what real justice looked like. Ask ChatGPT. The courthouse felt colder than expected, not because of the temperature but because of the tension that filled every hallway. The day Karen had to finally face the consequences arrived just as swiftly as her schemes had unraveled. The courtroom wasn't packed with strangers, but nearly every seat was filled with people she had wronged, people she had lied to, fined without cause, and manipulated through her fake authority. There were neighbors, some of the fake buyers she conned with promises of a secluded cabin oasis, and even 2 of the former HOA board members who had resigned after being exposed for ignoring her behavior. She walked in wearing a beige suit that looked like it belonged to someone trying very hard to appear modest. Her eyes scanned the room but never stopped on anyone for too long. When she caught sight of me sitting beside Rachel near the plaintiff's table, she shifted uncomfortably and glanced away. The charges had grown since her arrest. What began with trespassing and impersonation had ballooned into multiple counts of fraud, forgery, unlawful entry, and attempted property theft. But Karen, in true Karen fashion, had entered a plea of not guilty. Her defense strategy relied on the laughable argument that she had been given verbal permission by someone she thought was acting on my behalf. When pressed to name this person, she stammered and gave the name of a man who didn't exist. That's when Rachel pulled out the sting footage. The judge allowed the video to be played in court. The entire room fell silent as Karen's voice echoed through the speakers. There she was, confidently lying to Rachel's undercover persona, stating that the owner had relocated, that all legal paperwork was handled, and that cash buyers were being prioritized. She smiled in the footage. She gestured as if she had rehearsed the speech for weeks. When the video ended, the silence remained. The judge leaned forward, removed his glasses, and asked if Karen would like to revise her previous statement. She muttered something that sounded like misunderstood, and shook her head no. Her attorney, visibly sweating, asked for a brief recess. When court resumed, we submitted the forged documents she had filed with the HOA, the fake vacancy form, the Gmail address she had used to impersonate me, and even the screenshots from the private Facebook group where she marketed my property illegally. Several of the defrauded buyers gave statements. One woman, nearly in tears, explained how she had pulled from her savings account to make the deposit, thinking she was buying her retirement dream. Another man explained how he had driven 6 hours and missed a family emergency because he believed the opportunity would vanish quickly. Karen sat through it all with her hands clenched and her lips pressed tightly together. Then came the real bombshell. Barry, the spineless HOA manager who had accepted the fake forms, had turned fully cooperative and agreed to testify. He explained how Karen pressured him to accept the documents without due diligence, how she used intimidation tactics, and how she manipulated the system by dropping terms like board authorization and expedited transfer. He looked visibly ashamed on the stand, but he told the truth. And in that courtroom, truth had weight. The judge announced that a formal decision would be rendered in the following session, but no one doubted what it would be. The evidence was overwhelming, and the intent behind her actions was clear. Still, Karen clung to the image of a misunderstood do-gooder, refusing to accept guilt, even as her world crumbled around her. Outside the courtroom that day, a group of neighbors stood waiting, not to jeer but to make a point. Someone had brought a poster that read, "Our HOA is not her kingdom." Another held up a printed meme of Karen photoshopped onto a Monopoly board holding a go-to-jail card. Even as I walked past them, I couldn't help but smirk. It wasn't cruelty. It was justice with a dose of poetic flair. Back home, the aftermath of the trial stirred a different kind of action. The HOA was now under full audit. With Karen's lies exposed, many residents began sharing their own stories. How fines mysteriously appeared in their mailboxes, how Karen hosted secret board meetings, how she once charged a family for having a birthday party without prior HOA clearance. Each story added another layer to the community's realization that for years, they'd been ruled by someone who weaponized rules for her own gain. What had started as a fraud case about a cabin had morphed into a full-blown reckoning. Meanwhile, I poured my energy into rebuilding what Karen had violated. I started by reclaiming every inch of the cabin she had tried to steal. I repainted the porch, sanded and sealed the deck she had falsely claimed was recently refinished, and replaced the locks with a digital system that required facial ID for entry. I even added a perimeter security system that sent alerts directly to my phone. But more than just physical repairs, I was repairing the sense of peace I had lost. The cabin was no longer just a hideaway. It had become a symbol of ownership, not just of land, but of justice reclaimed. One morning, as I chopped wood near the fire pit, I got a call from Rachel. She said the class action lawsuit had moved forward faster than expected. The judge had approved initial restitution for all those Karen had scammed. Several victims had already begun receiving reimbursement from a court-ordered seizure of Karen's personal asset. It turned out she had quite a bit tied up in HOA funds, and some of her properties were now under investigation for similar shady dealings. She wasn't just a one-time offender. She had been running her own little empire of exploitation for years, and now it was crumbling. What none of us expected was that Karen would attempt one final move. Just days before her sentencing, she filed a civil counterclaim accusing me of public defamation and emotional distress. According to her, the social media posts, courtroom exposure, and the memes had ruined her standing in the community. Her claim was quickly dismissed by the court as frivolous, but it revealed just how far she was willing to stretch reality to maintain control. Even on the brink of collapse, Karen believed she was the victim. The sentencing day came with little drama. Karen received a sentence of probation, community service, and a hefty restitution order. She was banned from holding any position within the HOA or any similar organization for a minimum of 10 years. She was also ordered to attend a fraud prevention course, a cruel irony if ever there was one. Her once dominant presence in the community had vanished. The woman who used to parade around with clipboards and citations now walked past neighbors with her eyes on the ground. That evening, I hosted a small gathering at the cabin. Just a few trusted neighbors, friends, and of course Rachel. We sat around the fire pit, laughing at the absurdity of it all, passing around plates of barbecue and mugs of cider. Someone asked if I'd ever thought about selling the cabin now that it had been violated. I shook my head. This place had been tested and had stood strong. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was proof that no matter how deep someone tried to dig their claws into your life, truth, grit, and a little help from good people could pull it all back. Before the night ended, Rachel raised a toast. To cabins that can't be stolen, to Karens who can't win, and to the... Months passed, and with each week that went by, the cabin returned to its original state of calm. The wounds Karen left behind had mostly healed, though the story of what she did had become something of a local legend. Whenever I walked into town or stopped by the general store, someone inevitably brought it up, usually with a laugh or a shake of the head. Strangers still asked me if they could see the famous cabin, and a few even joked about booking an open house tour. I took it in stride. If my home had become a symbol of HOA insanity turned upside down, I could live with that. What mattered was that it was still mine. Untouched now, secure, and above all, peaceful. Despite the resolution in court and the collapse of Karen's little empire, the ripple effects continued to spread. The county commissioner's office began looking more closely into other HOA complaints across the region. Apparently, mine wasn't the only one with a self-elected tyrant abusing her position. The commissioner even visited my property to see firsthand the mess that had prompted the local shakeup. We stood near the old fire pit while he listened to the whole saga and took note. Before he left, he turned to me and said it was stories like mine that reminded him how fragile community trust could be when power went unchecked. That sentiment lingered with me long after he drove off. Meanwhile, the HOA that once ruled the area with petty fines and arrogant mandates was restructured. Several new board members were elected, neighbors who actually cared about transparency and mutual respect. Gone were the days of people getting citations for grass being half an inch too tall or wind chimes being too reflective. The neighborhood slowly started to feel like a community again. A place where people helped each other rather than reported each other. I wasn't interested in joining the new board, but I did attend meetings from time to time, just to make sure the spirit of accountability stayed alive. As for Karen, she'd faded into obscurity, but her name still had a gravitational pull. Rumors swirled about her trying to move to a gated condo complex in another part of the state, only to be rejected when someone Googled her name and found the court case summary. One former board member, who had briefly tried to defend her, later confessed that Karen had manipulated her too, guilt-tripping her into silence and covering her trail whenever someone asked questions. It amazed me how long she had managed to operate without anyone challenging her authority. It only took one person, one well-timed return, to send the whole thing crashing down. I used some of the settlement money to make upgrades that I had long delayed. The deck was no longer something I planned to fix. It was rebuilt entirely with reclaimed hardwood, treated to endure even the harshest winters. I installed solar panels, a backup battery system, and a rainwater collection tank cleverly disguised behind the woodshed. The cabin had always been off-grid, but now it was self-reliant and smarter than ever. I added an AI-powered security system that could recognize friendly faces and flag unknown visitors. Just knowing that if Karen ever came within 50 yards of my property, I'd know before she even stepped on the gravel, gave me a certain comfort. Still, for all the upgrades and renewed safety, the emotional scars lingered. There were nights I'd sit by the window and imagine those strangers again, sipping wine on my porch as if I didn't exist. It wasn't about the invasion of property, it was the violation of space, of intention. This cabin was built with my own 2 hands, piece by piece over 3 years. I had driven every nail, carved every step into the hillside path, and stacked every log with a vision in mind. To see someone try and rewrite that story, hijack that space for personal profit, wasn't just illegal. It was personal. But over time, I allowed those memories to fade. Not forget, just no longer center stage. I found new routines, deeper rest, and better focus. I began hosting small weekend retreats for local artists and writers, opening the space to those who needed the same refuge I once built for myself. Nothing commercial, nothing too big. Just a quiet invitation to those who needed a break from the world. The first time I did it, someone asked if I worried about people overstaying or taking advantage. I laughed and told them if they could out-Karen, I'd be impressed. And then came an unexpected visit. One afternoon, as I was splitting wood behind the cabin, a car rolled up slowly. It wasn't a visitor I recognized, so I walked around cautiously, axe still in hand. The woman who stepped out wasn't threatening, she looked anxious, maybe even apologetic. Her name was Clara, and she introduced herself as Karen's sister. I didn't know what to expect. My guard went up instantly. But then she handed me a sealed envelope and said she had come to apologize. She said Karen had been spiraling long before the incident and that what happened at my cabin was just the culmination of years of control issues, boundary problems, and a refusal to admit fault. Clara said she had cut ties with her after the court case, but seeing how the community had changed made her want to make amends in some small way. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter. It wasn't an apology from Karen, it was from Clara. She thanked me for standing up, for not letting it go, and for showing everyone that no matter how powerful someone seems in a small pond, the truth always finds a way to rise. I read it once, then twice, and tucked it away in a drawer. I didn't know what to make of it at first, but it gave me closure I hadn't realized I needed. The storm had passed, and now even the people around Karen had started rebuilding their lives. One final touch remained. I decided to commission a custom sign to hang at the entrance to the driveway, just above the newly installed gate. It was made of red cedar and engraved with clean, bold letters. It read, in a tone both cheeky and firm, "Not for sale, not abandoned, not yours." Beneath it was a smaller tag that read "Owner present, HOA free zone." Visitors loved it. Hikers stopped to take pictures. Even the mailman chuckled the first time he saw it. On the anniversary of the day I caught Karen hosting her first fake open house, I spent the evening in silence. No music, no distractions. Just a fire, a good book, and the comforting creak of the old floorboard. I thought about everything that had happened, how close I had come to losing my home without even knowing it, and how, by pure coincidence or fate, I'd come back just in time to stop it all. Most people don't get to confront their villains head-on. Even fewer get to expose them with an audience, legal backing, and video evidence. But I had. I hadn't just reclaimed my property. I had reclaimed my voice. And in doing so, I had reminded an entire neighborhood that fear only wins when you let it. As the fire crackled and the stars scattered across the dark sky above, I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was finally mine again. No fake listings. No HOA overreach. No forged documents. Just the wind through the trees, the warmth of a well-earned peace, and the knowledge that sometimes, coming home early can change everything. Ask ChatGPT.